City of Stevens Point Plan Commission meeting, recorded June 17, 2025.
6 o'clock, I will call the special Plan Commission meeting to order. Director, a roll call, please.
Mayor Wiesa is excused. Alderperson Nebom?
Here.
Commissioner Moscoviak?
Here.
Commissioner Rice?
Here.
Commissioner Schuler?
Here.
Commissioner Beacom?
Here.
And the rest are excused.
And we have a quorum, so we will go right into the first item on the agenda. These are discussion and possible action on the presentation of the comprehensive plan purpose and update process by North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission staff. Yes, thank you.
Is there a clicker or is someone else clicking for me?
Hold on one second here. We do have Pete Hartson joining as well.
Oh, cool.
All right. So I can advance the slides for you, not a problem. All right. Assume you want slide 1.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right. Good evening, everyone. So, quick intro. I'm Sam Wessel, North Central Regional Planning Commission. I've begun drafting the chapters for this comprehensive plan, but I want to give us a little bit of a background first to just for a snapshot of where we are and how much we've done so far. So, real quick, back in 1999, Smart Growth Law went in effect. That's a state statute that prescribes the elements of a comprehensive plan. There's 9 different ones that we'll go through one by one. It specifies a 10-year minimum between updates. There's no police going around if yours is older than 10 years, but it's a good idea to keep them updated. And that initial rule passed that you should have your first one done by 2010, and Stevens Point had their first one done in 2005 that met all the requirements of that statute. There were a few plans prior to that, the 1965 one and the 1983 one. Some of the findings from those may have made it into that 2005 plan, but I haven't seen those, so I'm just putting that up there so people have a history. And then more recently, there was the People Are the Point strategic plan, which focused on a few elements such as housing, entrepreneurship, innovation, inclusion, and that led to the master plans you're probably familiar with for the different commercial corridors that we have completed already, and then some neighborhood planning efforts that went underway. At some point, there's a lot of work that's been done so far, but there was a desire to shift towards, let's put this all in one document to make it a little more accessible for both staff and for the public. So that's where we've stepped in now, and our goal here is to take all that work that's been done so far, streamline it down into the most usable format we can, into a comp plan that will meet state statute on there. And we'll go through the chapters one by one and look for feedback as we go. So a big part of the new plan is we just want to reduce the size of it. So back in 2005, there was a lot of grant funding and people went all out in their comp plans. That was very common. Now that we've used them for 20 or so years, we've learned that the trend now is to more condense things. And if there's something that is super detailed and useful, it's sometimes better to cross-reference it rather than include the entire thing into the comp plan. So we can pick and choose how we approach that as we go. Again, with the user friendliness, that's the goal here for both, the public uses this too when they want to know what to expect as the city develops. And then some of those same themes from those previous planning efforts are going to be carried into this plan, such as the quality of life, economic development, developing those commercial corridors that are, some of them are already developed, but they might maybe have some potential to be enhanced. Others, maybe there's some new areas for growth. Enhancing the existing neighborhoods, but also looking into more housing options as, vacancy rates are pretty low, and that affects the ability to attract a workforce and enhance that quality of life. And then finally, sustainability. Of course, Stevens Point has deep history with sustainability and the various programs at the college and the good working relationship between the community and the college. So we want to include that too. Next slide. So here are the 9 elements. Tonight we just have the issues and opportunities, which is demographics. And some disclaimers I want to give. Actually, it might be on the next slide. Well, I'll start with the process or how we're going to do this. So I'm the one who's drafting the chapters. So anytime you have a suggested edit or, it could be content-wise or mechanical, grammar, that sort of thing, feel free to contact me. My contact information will be at the end of the presentation. The city staff has expressed interest in also playing a role with GIS and public participation, so it's kind of a hybrid approach, which is cool because you guys have already been maintaining all this GIS data all these years and doing all this public participation stuff, so it's great to have people who are already familiar with your existing setup. And then we'll do these internal meetings with department heads once we get to certain chapters. Utilities and community facilities is a big one where you want to get as much data as you can from your department heads that's useful. And then regular plan commission meetings to review the chapters themselves. And then we'll probably have a meeting too with some surrounding jurisdictions to get feedback on growth and boundaries and those sort of things that come up. There was a 2024 survey that we did for the county comprehensive plan, and we were able to filter out the results to just City of Stevens Point residents, so that's going to be attached to this plan. Chris also has plans to do survey questions as we go along through the chapters that I'll put on our website, the hyperlink to get to those, and then the city will have that as well. And then once we have all the chapters as far along as we think we can get them, then we put them through the public hearing process where it's, we say to the community, it's ready to go, take a look, what do you think? Then there's a public hearing, people can weigh in, and then we adopt an ordinance to adopt the plan, and hopefully it will last you another 10 years. So the goal is, if we stay on track, summer of 2026, but we can adjust that as needed if we find something unforeseen, and we definitely want to make this plan the best we can make it. So next slide. The typical flow of a chapter follows this pattern where we start with the background, we go through the previous planning documents that have already been done. So for example, you have the natural resource one. Anything we know of in the community, like whether it's a lake management plan or a parks and rec plan, that makes it in, so we can get the recommendations and the cross-reference there. Then we move into the issues, which you guys will help identify. I started with some that I speculate are already well known, but there might be others that we can throw in there or adjust as needed. Then we go through inventory and trends, which is where a lot of the data comes in, followed by the maps. And then the goals, objectives, and policies are really the big focus of what you guys need to develop, because that guides your decision-making for the next decade. Sometimes people think, well, the comp plan looks a lot like a zoning map. Are you rezoning the whole city at once? No. The future land use map is for setting a vision, so then future decisions can be aligned with that vision, even if the zoning isn't there today where you would like it in the future. We'll get into that more in detail. That chapter is towards the end, so we don't have to worry about that quite yet, but that's just an example. Next slide.
So at this point, I think we've set a break to transition from the background and the process and move into chapter 1. So is there any more content that you wanted to describe for disclaimers? And this is where I thought was a natural break in your presentation to pause before transitioning.
Yeah, I would say, the last two slides I have, those are kind of a recap of what we'll go through. Before getting into the data, the disclaimers, I do want to make a lot of it comes from census. Census is usually 2 years behind reality, so if you see a trend, you might mentally want to add on another couple years to whatever that trend is. Also, the years between census years are projected from a smaller sample size of people who get the American Community Survey, so there's more margin of error going on there. So in general, the big takeaway is the numbers are useful for identifying overall trends, but sometimes it's easy to get hung up on, is that the exact population number or the exact median income? It's the best we can do. Census is the most robust data set, which is why we use it so heavily. But anytime something looks like, we might think it's a little different from what census says, there's an opportunity to explain that in the text, the various anecdotal stuff we know on top of that. And I'll get into that a little bit with the population especially. So yeah, we can go straight into chapter 1 if you'd like. Also, 2020 was kind of a weird census year, people say, because COVID happened, people weren't always answering their doors, or they were living somewhere temporarily, or college students went home. So is 2020 a great census year? I don't know, but it's just some things we can note in the plan as we look at the numbers. So Chris, do we want to bring up the PDF document and sort of scroll through it, or do you want me to sort of touch on the highlights first?
So there was 3 more slides from your presentation deck that felt like touched on chapter 1. Jared, if you would like to just go through these slides just to make sure. So this was some of the information that we discussed just briefly. Jared, in the thumb drive, there is the PDF version of the document. Should be in there.
SP Comp Meeting 1?
Should be in the
No.
agenda packet.
Oh, in the agenda packet. Gotcha. Gotcha.
All right, cool. So I've got a copy of it in my hand. If I need to make some edits, I've got my pen ready. Just let me know. This is really quick history, nothing too surprising. If we want to expand on it, we can. If not, and also, I don't know the pace you guys want to go through this at. If we want to go through it once quickly and then go back to something more fine detailed, it's up to you guys.
Sure. So all of the commissioners have received the first draft. So if we could just do a quick overview, and then if commissioners have any questions regarding particular points and sections, then we can return unless there's the
I
commissioners.
got questions by page.
Okay.
So I don't know, does it make sense to give an overview and then go through it step by step, or
Sure.
just go through it?
So why don't we page by page then?
Yeah, 'cause some of the pages we won't have a lot to talk about.
Sounds great.
Can I just make one quick point?
Sure.
Or a question? On the slide before, you laid out the steps that you were going to use for each chapters, and you had issues being identified before you did inventory and trends analysis. And it seems to me that you would do that after background and inventory and trends analysis, because that's the only way you can identify the real issues based on the data. So I guess that would be my recommendation. And if you can tell me why maybe the issues are better served before you actually get to the data.
Yeah, it all has to do with how you prefer to read it. I mean, we don't come up with the issues and then look at the census data. We do all the tables, well, at least when I'm writing it, I do all the tables, and then before, publishing a draft for you guys to review, I make sure that the tables support what those issues are. If it makes sense to put it there, we certainly can.
I think for the reader, they can see the information and then understand how the issues were identified maybe a little better than using the tables to kind of justify the issues you already identified.
So issues after inventory and trends, but then before you get to goals, objectives, and policies would be the
Yes,
preferred.
because the goals, objectives, and policies will help you figure out the issues. And if you could put a date on each draft that we get, that would be great.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Maybe we can go to the slides, since they generally are a summary of the first chapter, the next ones that are lined up. So the population stuff is probably what we want to focus on the most. So yeah, that's the one. So 2020 census at 25,666. That's a slight dip from 2010. Again, was 2020 the best census year? I don't know. American Community Survey also has it lower in 2023 relative to 2010. But DOA does their own population estimates, and they're 1 year more recent, and they do a different methodology. I don't know why or what's different about it, but theirs is a bit higher. I looked it up. It's 26,619. I just looked it up the other day, so it's not on here. But I can add that too anecdotally, so we have a variety of sources to look at, because ultimately we don't know what's going to come next. The state has those official population projections, which are pretty dismal. They're based off the 2020 census, which we've seen an unexpected rebound in population through much of Wisconsin, especially more rural areas. Since 2020, that sort of bucks that trend that they based it off of. So we do have to include that, or we should include the DOA stuff because it's the official state projections, but I presented an alternative scenario just to show, what would it look like if we hypothetically grew at the same rate we did between 2000 and 2020, just to give a range of possibilities. Obviously, none of us know exactly what will happen, but it's a lot better than just sticking with the really pessimistic view, the state projections, which already don't seem to be coming to fruition. We're seeing more people moving to smaller towns, more mid-sized communities compared to before 2020. So what do you guys think of that approach? And there is a table on, you can see on pages 9 has them in tables, and then page 10 has it graphed out. And if I did not explain it well, let me know, and I can make a second attempt.
Well, I think we have to really go with the DOA projections because they're the only independently verifiable source that we have. But I really like the idea of the logic that you used to create a second scenario with a different, I mean, at the end of the day, even though population projections are what you're supposed to plan on in terms of, land, housing, whatever availability, it's just kind of like especially when both scenarios are kind of a low growth scenario, it's just nice to have that confidence, and then of what you're trying to shoot for, you're not going to be overwhelmed. You can really concentrate on really what you want to do. So I think it's a fine approach in terms of being justifiable and understandably variable. So, I mean, that's my opinion. So if anybody else has any other.
Yeah, and I was going to mention, I have in the text too that those state projections, they didn't factor any large sort of shift in migration patterns. So there's all this talk about, the Great Lakes states are going to be a climate refuge if certain areas have too many wildfires or heat waves and stuff. That's just much harder to predict than just looking at the existing age groups and, deaths versus births, which is what these are based on. So I put that in there just as a disclaimer saying, these are the official state ones. Here they are. But there's these other variables that they did not account for, and they put that in their own text. So it's not like I'm coming up with that on my own.
Yeah.
Any other comments from the commissioners?
I generally think it's, reasonable. At a glance, I can imagine a certain amount of just kind of community, confusion or pushback, right? If they're exclusively looking at, the 2050 projections and saying, well, that's a 50% difference in population. Surely we need to be able to predict this more narrowly so that we can plan accordingly, but it's 25 years out. Again, if you look 5-10 years out, you're talking about a 10% discrepancy. I think it's reasonable for staff or for us to use those shorter term numbers and kind of explain and help people understand that we can continue to watch this over time and adjust these projections over time. So I think it's a reasonable approach to at least acknowledge that there's not a definitive answer to the population level 25 years out.
Yeah, two things I just thought of. One is that it's possible for me to just take the average of the two, high and low, to do just a visual middle if someone wants it for reference. The other
It's
thing
artificial.
Yeah.
You're just making that up. I mean, the one thing is justified. You have a logic for why you did it. But
right.
Then to just give it an average, you're making it more meaningless with every iteration of calculation, right? So.
Okay.
Well, I do have a thought or consideration. So if we are monitoring annually, population trend, and in order to insert it, can we use that as a moving target to adjust the trend line that North Central Wisconsin Regional Plan Commission is putting forward?
I would venture that it's not even a goalpost or something we're shooting for. It's just a random bit of information that I think, if I can jump ahead a little bit, that the high line for me is that Point needs to, Point needs to attract people to grow, and Point is situated to be attractive for growth. Those are the two, and I base that on kind of just what you've said already. If the population is such that if we really want to grow, we need to tailor our strategies toward actually attracting people, because given the natural order of things based on the state, more people aren't going to live here, right? So, and I think the city's philosophy has been to attract people. And I like the fact, and not in an apologetic way, but mentioning the possibility of migration based on resources. I mean, we've had people show up at public hearings and already state that, well, we had one guy who said, I'm a resource refugee, right? He moved here from the West Coast. And so I think that the logic is there to understand those two types of projections and then allow the city to say, okay, our basic mode is going to be, what can we do to become sustainable, attractive, which is kind of the stance all along, but this really kind of clarifies that that needs to be the ambition, is to do that. So, sorry.
And I could put a note in there too, that DOA, we can expect them probably to do every census, 20, 30, a few years later, they'll probably release
Yep.
new projections then. That's a ways off, but just to make note that those future numbers will change every 10 years anyways.
Seems to me you could say this a lot easier and with a lot less graphs and charts here. This is just like, every other template that you just start to plug words into. I don't even like the fact that the first chapter is called Issues and Opportunities. It's starting out with, issues. Wow, maybe we should call it Challenges and Dreams.
You could take that up with the state legislature, I guess. People have been doing that
Does it
since, I think,
have to be
1999. So.
the same? There are, similar words. It just, you could say in a paragraph what the population trends are. Are you looking at how AI might affect future anything, or what futurists are even saying about what could be the underpinnings of our economy in 10 years or 15 years? Who knows what AI is going to do, except for the trades. Never going to get AI to come and fix a leaky faucet, but
Elon's working on that.
this just seems like it's really dry and uninspiring. It's just, you could say the households are this and the educational attainment is that. We don't need page after page of this. Maybe we do, I don't know. It just seems like, after about the third chart, I'm like, what does this one mean that this one doesn't mean? Or these are basically the same thing. You're just restating the same thing in different ways. Anyway, in my opinion, for what it's worth.
Well, I would like to dovetail off what Alder Kneebone said, and I agree that the most concise report plan we can have, the better it will be, because the planning should be the shortest distance to complete the plan so you can actually work on implementation, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's where I guess I agree, but I also feel like some people like to call it boilerplate or template. But the statute also has a list of things that we need to include. And the most, I guess, artful way to include and check all those boxes, which this chapter does, it covers everything that the 66-1001 says we need, right? So I like the detail as long as we can draw conclusions from it quickly and not linger. That's why I hope we never get, during this process, a discussion on the population, because the 2050 population is really irrelevant. It's the how do we see ourselves between now and then that's relevant, right? And if it's a moderate paced growth that we need to really find ways to encourage and make interesting and attractive, then that's something we would have learned from that. So I agree with, you don't want something that looks the same as everything else, but then you don't want to dwell on the form because you want to get past the plan to actually start doing things. And the plan really needs to set you up to be able to do the implementation that you and the community members really feel that you need. So there's that fine line between having something that's, of a certain style, and then there's is the box checked? Have we talked to enough people? Can we relate to people that we heard them? And these are our policies that reflect what they want and what the Common Council wants, and move toward getting it done as quickly as possible, in 5-year chunks or whatever a strategic plan might say for what we want to do in those mile markers, X ways down the road after we actually adopt the plan. Mm-hmm. So.
And one thing that's on my, sorry, I cut someone off. I was saying one thing that's on my mind when I write these too is people often use comprehensive plans to apply for grant funding and other sorts of projects, and so I try to provide stuff they might need as it might be boring information, but it's useful to have on hand if, the comp plan supports this or that. Here's the data showing why. But I can definitely take a look at, streamlining without eliminating, because I'm always a fan of shortening things up too.
What we have to have, we have to have. There's no
Yeah.
getting around it. But if we could make it, sound a little better or look a little better, or maybe be stated in a different way.
Or draw it to a point where it can obviously make sense why you actually looked at that
Exactly.
data.
Yeah.
Yeah, the table and the figures are very important pieces of factual information, but what's missing in some regard is the why kinds of contextual information. We've got these numbers. We talk about the Portage County population pyramid. Why are those numbers important? What does that mean for the future? And what are the contexts that lead to that? Like, for example, we compare Stevens Point in median household income, and we note that it's lower, significantly lower than the other villages, cities, county, Wisconsin, and the United States. But we don't really tease out the question, why? And the why question with this factual information is perhaps more important than the factual information itself. So trying to tease out the why questions will be important for understanding what policies and programs do we need to take this to grow into the future. Because without the context, we won't know what policies might be important. Like, is the Stevens Point median household income that low because of the university? I suspect that it has an impact, but the plan doesn't address that. Would it be significantly higher if it wasn't for those 7,000 students in the poverty?
Yeah, I have a few speculative things underneath Table 6. Generally, a pattern you can find is an older
But I
urban
think it's
area.
got to be more than
Yeah.
speculation. I think we need to tease out what evidence do we have that that is in fact the case. And can we talk to professionals from ACS to figure out, well, how is the census conducted and how are university students treated, and have that as summary information, not summary information, but
Yeah.
contextual information to make those facts matter to us. Because if we can't understand where the facts are coming from or what they mean, they won't lead us into good policy directions.
I think I remember them saying that prior to 2020, they would count you where you lived, your home address. And then in 2020, they wanted to start counting you where you went to school because you're there for more of the year than you are at home typically. But then everyone got sent home early in 2020. So that's a good follow-up question to see, okay, how did they do it in the end?
And I think there's other chapters of the plan that we could keep a question like that in mind and try to tease out, whether it be in economic development, if you're talking about jobs, type of jobs, because at some point, if it follows that painful template that the statute lays out, you're talking about what strengths you have, what weaknesses you have in terms of employment, or what types of jobs do you think you need and why. And that would be certainly a place that the city could get into with you, the discussion on, well, what types of jobs are really out there. Is it younger folks taking part-time or lower wage jobs because they're in a temporary situation and, that type of a thing, which gets at, why that's happening. So I don't know if it needs to be fully explored in this particular chapter, but it is something to absolutely keep track of.
Yeah, the economic development chapter, we go way deeper into the income, the employers. We did do an entrepreneurial ecosystem study 2 years ago, and one thing that was interesting that came out of that was that a lot of job growth is fueled by smaller establishments these days rather than one big employer coming in. So existing businesses adding jobs or people starting their own business, leaving a different one. So we can incorporate some of that data too. Yeah, more to come on that for the economic development chapter. Well, it's good to hear this stuff ahead of time as I draft these. Housing will be a big chapter too that deals with demographics, because sometimes you can have a flat population, but because the household size is decreasing, you still have demand for housing. So say you raised 3 kids and then now those kids are adults and they moved out. Well, your family of 5 might be now 3 households instead of 1 20 years ago. So that's something to also consider. But the housing chapter will have more of, how do these demographics impact housing demand over time? And unfortunately, they haven't come out with household projections from the state yet. Last time they released them at the same time, I think, but this time they said we don't know when they're going to be done, so we have to use our best guess.
I do have a question about the pyramids.
Yeah.
Better served as numbers or percentages?
This is a boring response, but this is the way they do pyramids. Mainly the goal is just to show the shape visually, where you have, they used to be pyramids because the population was like
So
this.
Minecraft.
Yeah, now they're
Okay.
population boxes, now that we're getting a more top-heavy population, is people are able to live longer, but people are also having fewer kids.
But my question would be that is, instead of across the top 1,600 and 1,168, would percentages be more effective in terms of communicating what that means, or a percentage on the actual row total with the numbers in between? Just a question that I put to the group. And when I look at that, I see a lot of numbers that I don't have a lot of apparent context to for me. I'm not a number guy. So I leave that as an open question as you look at that.
I could easily combine male and female and do the percent in just the age bracket and put that on top of there as one option, or some other things I could try playing around with. But that would give you a sense of, 20% of our population's above this age this year, and then now it's 40% in 20 years or whatever.
Okay.
That would improve the digestion of the information, and make it easier to interpret.
Looking at the number of 60 to 69-year-olds, when it comes to the housing chapter, anything with stairs is going to be not something they're going to be looking for. So an aging population and how that effect will have on the housing stock, but it also frees up single-family homes when they downsize. So it's an interesting mix.
Yeah, we typically find there's more interest in low maintenance stuff, multi-generational stuff, because you don't commonly find, most houses have basements in Wisconsin. They're not zero entry like now there's more of an interest in.
If I could chime in there a bit, can you hear me? This is Pete Arnson.
Yep.
All right. No, I agree with those comments, and I was wondering that same thing, looking at it, and I think showing the percentages for the total population, I don't think you need to split it out. That you can look at and say 1642, 1168, while there's more females. But it would be good to have that age group percentage going through, because I was trying to figure out where is it, and I'm kind of surprised, right? It's not so much a pyramid, it's more like a tower, and I didn't realize that our age groups were so evenly distributed, really.
Yeah, historically they were pyramids until,
Pyramid dome.
these last few decades where they're shifting.
Thanks.
Chris, I have one more slide that gets into a little bit more of the income. We already kind of discussed it, but if you wanted to click, we could have that just up for reference.
Is it the next one?
This one?
Yep. That one. Yeah, so some ideas I had about why the income's lower. Not only when you have full-time students with 2 college campuses, maybe a greater share of the population isn't working 40+ hours a week because they're in school for, a decent chunk of time. Another is just the byproduct of when you're in the more older urban core, you have smaller lot sizes, you have a greater variety of housing styles, you have more walkability. So someone who is living in a smaller footprint or, living without a car is more likely to live near a downtown or in an older neighborhood versus, living out in the country where you tend to have those higher income supporting more miles being put on cars and larger lot sizes and that sort of thing. But certainly we're not done looking into all the factors that contribute to that. So I'll keep brainstorming and feel free to shoot me your ideas. I've also been curious about why our incomes are growing more slowly than nationwide, because I'm finding that a lot in our 10 counties, and I don't know why. I've never really heard anyone discuss that topic, so that might be a research project for me to look into.
Maybe to that point, it's anecdotal, perhaps, looking at the rate of cost growth. It might be a pretty easy explanation is, wage growth is kind of tied directly to cost of living change. And I'm guessing our cost of living just doesn't escalate in the same way as the coastal elites. So, yeah, might be just might be some evidence to support that.
I think there might be also something to evaluate as like a micropolitan area in terms of higher incomes and ability to construct a new home. We've had a lot of, significant single-family home construction in communities to the south of us versus inside the city of Stevens Point. And so, folks who are living within our community may have positions that are earning more, but living in Plover, Whiting, Park Ridge, they might be able to afford a more expensive property. Right, so there might be some correlation there too.
Yeah, and I should mention, because I don't think it was on the slide, these are incomes of city residents. They're not the incomes of the jobs within the city limits, if that makes sense. But we do in Chapter 6 compare both, because we have another open source data portal called MZ that gives wages within the given geography rather than wages of the residents in a given geography, if that makes sense. There's just two different ways of measuring it, but yeah, both are important to look at.
It reminds me of my county board supervisor, Bobby Gifford, and how, bless his heart, he always stands up and talks about the, 80% of Portage County, he says, are asset limited income constrained employed, the Alice group. And that seems to bear out with what your statistics are finding, that the wages are lower, it seems to be countywide, not just Point, I guess.
Yeah, we include those Alice numbers in a future chapter. I think it comes up in housing and maybe economic development, but you'll see that they are a little more higher than the surrounding municipalities and the county ones.
When we were just talking about, I guess, people may be working here but living elsewhere, does the Regional Plan Commission have access to the cell phone data that's been kind of prevalent in other studies and plans?
Yeah, so Wausau Chamber of Commerce has it. Maybe I'll ask them. But we do have census on the map, which does a commuter analysis. I don't think it's as robust as that data set, but I can talk to Dennis to see if anyone else in our office has used that cell phone stuff before.
Because I have seen other maps that have shown that. I believe the mechanism that we used with a consultant when I was in another community was Pacer AI. And that proved to be very beneficial in mapping that out to show, not only where people are traveling, living here and traveling to work, but also the other way around, I guess, as well. So might have some benefits to include those mapping and visuals and conclusions that we can draw from that in here as well.
Yeah.
Other questions?
One more statistic I wanted to point out is that the growth in the number of jobs for city residents has grown faster than the surroundings. So I don't know if that means because of the younger median age, there's fewer people retiring here versus, outside of Stevens Point. nearby. But it was one thing that was interesting to keep an eye on. And then this is essentially my last recap slide. My next slide is just my contact information, so I don't know if you want to bring up the PDF at all and zoom in on stuff, or if you want me to work with it a little more first before we get into that much detail.
I guess I'll circle back to the commissioners if there were any other comments or points that you wanted to make on the draft before
Sure.
the conclusion.
Should I just?
Yeah.
Page 6. The equity, diversity, and inclusion paragraph. You'll want to double check to see if the county still has a diversity affairs and inclusivity committee, because they might have eliminated it.
Yeah, that came straight from the people are the point, just a summary of what was the content of that plan, but I can make a note if that is no longer.
That makes sense. I was wondering if on this page, I know that under the map, it says that insert summary of all planning activities here when creating the final draft. At the end of page 6, it seemed like not a bad place to add a sentence indicating the adoption of a public participation plan, to sort of indicate that that's how this planning process is starting. So I don't know where that bit of information works best, or if it's, I see we started on page 5 or something like that. It might have already been mentioned in the first 4.
So how I do it is I've got like the cover page, acknowledgements, table of contents, and then chapter 1 starts. In that public participation summary, I do the whole, we started with a public participation plan. I do a brief summary of all the survey results for those who don't want to read the entire appendix full of them right at the beginning, so we can see like here's the big takeaways from the survey for someone who doesn't want to read the whole thing. But that's usually where I put that public participation stuff. I just wait till the end when we have all that because,
Well, my point was to talk about the public participation process for this plan that city adopted, a plan that specifies when and how folks could be a part of the planning. And it just seems like that would be good to include somewhere to let people know that those were the opportunities. It'll be past tense at that point, but.
Right, yep, that's exactly what I do. If, I'll do a bullet point of this is how many surveys went out, and this is who, if there's a special meeting with certain stakeholders, I put that in there. There are this many plan commission meetings, so that'll all be in there.
Okay, page 8. Little things. You're missing an R in data sources.
Yes, I saw that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I guess, again, I thought that the descriptive paragraph was good, and the last paragraph on page 8 indicates those opposing forces acting on population. So I thought that was a very good part of, establishing that idea as the reader moves through the draft to understand that these kind of the things in play. There's dusty projections, and then there's the real world of what's going on. Let's see. Again, that's repeated on page 9, which I like. I guess the last sentence on page 10 identifies, you kind of focused on the under 18 and over 65 as the two main groups you wanted to call out in the description. And I was wondering if there's any other cohorts worth mentioning or focusing on. And again, that's sort of just an open question. I don't have any particular desire to see more, but are there any other aspects of the population?
Yeah, I'm wondering if, going back to those population projections, if we look at X number of people will be 65 and over in the next decade, because I feel like that's probably a big question that's on a lot of people's minds without any clear what are we going to do about it. Because I know senior housing is a big concern. It's already limited, and the demand for that is expected to go up. But also retrofitting houses for people who want to stay in their house longer, or all those implications. So yeah, that's a good one.
And I don't know if understanding different cohorts as you move through the age cycle, does that at any point enter into the conversation in the economic development element about what does your workforce look like, what type of employment do you have? What type do you think would be appropriate? And that's, I guess, to get to your point of, you talk about the future of what employment might be. And I assume there's going to be some general discussion of kind of the disruptive impact of AI and some ham-handed attempt at trying to figure out what might the future be, right? So, but I assume that'll be part of the discussion, several chapters.
Yeah. That's always the hardest is, which chapter does that go in? It could go in all 9 if we wanted to, so where do we put it? So.
And again, getting maybe back to one of Mary's points, in the education attainment section, there's a lot of stats, but I guess that's another indication of what do those stats really mean? Is there any sort of conclusion or question that can be asked by what the changes in education attainment over time bring up? And then that gets back probably to, one of the big things is consistency between chapters, so all of these themes will weave in and out of pretty much every chapter we're going to look at. And that gets back to the education, the age of folks, the type of work that's looked at, and making sense of it all the way through. So I didn't know, again, I don't have an answer, but that's what you're here for.
All right.
Or Dennis. Give this to Dennis.
Yes.
Let him work on this. Just what do those stats really mean, right? Mm-hmm. Is there something that can be useful as a conclusion as opposed to just, let's see. Again, with the income, it would be nice to know if there's any way to identify Y Point lags with its neighbors and Portage County. It is interesting that more people are being employed, that was listed on page 15, but at lower wages and both median and per capita. Let's see. Okay, the trends indicate a need for overall policies to assist in accommodating the demand changes. I assume that's kind of the philosophy as we look at trends to make sense of the numbers, to kind of bring them to a point. Is that your typical way that you approach this, is to kind of, there's a summary of the information that allows you to lead us through a discussion of what we feel the primary issues are that we really need to address with the plan? Will that be is that part of your process?
That was a long sentence. So you're asking.
Sorry about that. So as you go about it.
Yeah, so.
Every chapter, many chapters will have stats and trends, right? Or they have background information. And then there'll be kind of a summary that allows you to lead us through a discussion of, okay, out of all this information, what are the issues and what do you feel really needs to be done about it?
Yeah, I would say that's easily doable, is just to invert the flow of it, so then it's more, you start with the background and then move into the issues. Some people prefer to have the issues right off the bat so you know what to keep in mind as you're reading the data, but we can easily flip them around and make it just a little bit better of a flow.
That's really the end of my harangue. Well, I guess at some point, if you folks could explain to the Plan Commission, again, this is a kind of a broad question, but I think one the public will have questions about. Mm-hmm. How the data that we're going to be using helps best inform policy, and how can subsequent chapters do so? I assume it's a function of the issue discussion, right? But I think everyone will want to know, well, why is that important? Mary, you raised that before, but it is part of it prescribed by the state that we have to include these things to be considered an official plan. And I guess the reason you don't cut them out is so that the state can never say you have an incomplete plan, right? So it's one of those things where you're sort of backed into a corner of what you have to cover, which leads to the boilerplate, by the way. But I guess people will want to know, okay, yeah, this is the information that we need. And the council can feel comfortable that, all right, if I understand these statistics, I understand the issue and can form an informed opinion about an action to take about it. I think that's kind of always a little bit of a disconnect between numbers and what people want to get done, is they want to know why that's what you need to know. So.
Yeah, and I would say just the sense I get from this room tonight is just, maybe the approach is, well, here's some numbers that, might not be what we want them to be, but here's the potential. People might want to move to a safer, lower cost area. People might like the natural resources. And these numbers are motivation to do the best we can so that we can sort of reverse some of these, projected trends, even though we don't know what will happen for sure. But it's good to keep all that in mind as we make those decisions based on that info.
And it can almost be as simple as, okay, why does knowing per capita income and median income tell you something about your population? Sometimes there's a disconnect with that, even as, it's a number, but what does it mean? So.
Right.
Minor point on page 8 about data sources. When I first read this, it looks like it's data sources for the entire plan, not necessarily this plan chapter. And I'm wondering if data sources becomes a subheading under the category demographics, because the data sources are in regard to demographics, not other data sources that might include other things besides demographics.
Oh. Should a different chapter have different data needs? It's not necessarily from ACS or from census. Gotcha.
Yeah, I would say about probably 80% of the plan is from the same, but I can make a little note to clarify that it's not every single thing in there.
Or call out the difference when the difference turns up.
Yep, I do like the table footers, seeing where it comes from, if it's a different one.
Anybody else? Commissioner Arnson, or who else is online? We have one more online?
Commissioner Beacom.
Commissioner Beacom.
No, I just enjoying the dialogue, so.
Sounds good.
Yep, me too. I appreciate this, and good job, you guys who are there.
Thank you, omniscient observer.
Just want to know if Pete's got his hat on.
Yeah, right?
And
I do, but the video's off.
so I have one general comment, not directed to North Central. In my mind, Chapter 1 should be reviewed by the council, not to adopt it, but by way of understanding the data being used, understanding the approach, and basically saying, yeah, this is please proceed, or these are the questions we'd have. And it maybe doesn't have to be every chapter, but I think that you want to get off on the right foot.
It's not a bad idea.
And you want, I guess, the public to understand through a council discussion that they're doing it. It's even like, it doesn't even really require an action. I can't imagine, that it would, other than, no, this makes sense to us. And staff could be there to explain the ins and outs. It wouldn't require another RPC visit unless they're so generous with their time. And
We could have them reach out to
just an idea.
Chris or Jared here. I mean, truly, it's not a bad idea. I mean, some of them might be the first time they're ever looking at something like this, and if it doesn't make any sense at all to them, it won't make sense to the average person either. So
it's a really important time for buy-in, so just an idea.
Would it be helpful to do some of these suggested revisions before it goes to council that we discussed tonight, or as is?
Oh, I think typos and date is a good idea. The correction of, comma. If there's any typos, to clean them up, to put a date on it.
Well, and some of the rearranging and some of the digging a little more into context stuff too that we discussed, I could take a crack at.
Yeah, I'd be
some of
happy
that.
to also weigh in. I think there's a couple like opportunities to explain the whys that we've been documenting through this meeting that I'll work with Sam on doing prior to maybe a presentation to the council, and just to make it a little more clear to the council members why some of this data is important.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to make that change first.
And then they'll know what to expect in terms of sort of the form or content-wise coming through with the other chapters, and no surprises.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I don't draft another 8 chapters if the tone is off, or if the, I've never had someone suggest this, but I like it because it gets a sense of like, here's what we're looking for ahead of the curve, and then
Because we're doing it for them.
right.
We're recommending to them, and it would be nice if, they were okay with it.
Yeah.
I'm sure they would be, but, and again, not to adopt, because that's not the step that they would ever take, but just to say, we understand, and, because normally there's several here, and unfortunately, they're not here tonight, so.
Yeah, that's helpful for me to just get a style nailed down before proceeding on.
If there are any comments that weren't shared tonight that you are just itching to get off your chest, you think about something, just feel free to contact both me and Sam after the meeting.
I guess one more way to put the contextual information, and I like to share this with my students too, and how they develop their plans. Typically, I organize sections like this in 3 ways. I ask them to talk about what is the information that they're sharing, so what is the trend? I ask them to tell me why does that trend matter? And then I ask them to tell me what does it mean? And I think if we accomplish those 3 things in these sections, the plan would give us the fact-based information and then give us the context that lead to a good policy.
Sounds good to me. It's a good start. Definitely a good start. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
Thanks.
This is great.
First of many, I'm sure, eh?
Sometimes you just get blank stares, and it's like, I don't know if they love it or hate it.
So, next chapter would be?
So natural, agricultural, and cultural resources. It's the next one, and then housing would be the one after. We can do 2 at a time to stay on track, but
You probably wouldn't want to double up housing.
right, that's what I said. That's going to be a big one. That one and economic development and land use are usually the ones that might take a little longer. And then utility community facilities, that could be a near-term meeting, but we might need a meeting with some department heads before getting a draft out. So
Sure, we can arrange that.
okay, cool.
And I guess the question is, are we doing this monthly? Or what's the cadence for this going forward?
The cadence is as needed, so it might take a little bit longer between chapter revisions to schedule a meeting. So, like we mentioned at Plan Commission last, if the schedule aligns with normal Plan Commission, we'll hopefully have these presentations and discussions at Plan Commission as at regularly scheduled times, and only schedule a special meeting if we need to.
Housing sounds like a special.
Well, then I guess we can move on to item number 3, the director's report.
I promised this at our last Plan Commission meeting. There's nothing too much, there's nothing, I guess, extra in it, unless you guys have any questions, but happy to answer those after the fact as well. So just informational.
Sounds good. Well then, any questions?
I just have one question because it's popped up on a number of these directors' reports, and I don't think we've talked about it at all, but it's just labeled as airport development. I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah, no, happy to clarify. So out by the city's airport, we do have an area right off the interchange that would be available for development. Staff has not had the ability to put too much effort into it. I keep it there as more of a reminder to make sure it stays on our radar. Chris did work to put this on Locate in Wisconsin, or Locate Wisconsin, WEDC site for listing property. So it is out there. We've started to market it, but we have not been able to prioritize it for RFP or really have more community conversation about what could become, or what could develop on that property.
Sure. What location? You're talking about the Stanley Street and Highway 39 interchange?
Yes, yep, so it's going to be on the Marshfield Clinic side of I-39?
No, on the other side of Marshfield Clinic. Yes, sorry, yeah.
Yes.
Of I-39, yeah.
Marshfield side of I-39, but the south portion of it. So if you look at the airport fence next time you drive by it, the fence actually jots back into the woods.
Sure.
And the airport intentionally did that to not fence in the portion of developable land.
So
that
southeast
could,
corner of
yes.
that intersection?
Yep.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So, well, any questions from Commissioner Arntzen or Beacom about the director's report? Okay,
Oh, good by me.
No questions.
Then I guess we are adjourned at 7 o'clock.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.